Hey Monica, today I'm thinking a lot about minding the gap. And by gap, I mean the space between stimulus and response. Now, Stephen R. Covey attributed this to Viktor Frankl, and I've always thought that was the case, but I did a little bit of research today and I discovered that it's actually more likely to come from a psychologist named Rollo May. Even Covey himself wasn't quite sure where he got the quote from. And in particular about that gap, I've been thinking about Chris Voss and what he's doing to help fill that gap is some considerations about word choices and conversation constructs, like when you want to ask a question that gets to yes versus when you want to ask a question that gets to no, when you want to tell a story in first person versus when you want to tell it in second person. The clue that you're looking for between an answer from the other party of you're right versus that's right, and even how to get the proper placing of an apology into a boundary establishment. You know, the funny thing is that as I've been telling you all about Chris Voss and all of these little idiosyncrasies of language, you've come back with, well, you already do that, but you just don't think about it. And I think that you've mentioned that when you do actually think about it in this way, it kind of trips you up. And I thought that was really interesting because nobody really enjoys the feeling of being tripped up, or in a broader sense of feeling awkward in general, being overly self-aware. But I think a lot of that has to do with our brain wiring and how our brain is constantly looking towards the things that are familiar and we have a competency in, and that flow that we can do without a lot of awkwardness, and we tend to want to avoid things that are awkward. Now, Chris talks about this, and for it he uses this very simple exercise where he says take both your hands and he says stick one thumb up and stick the other finger out, and he goes, now switch them. And of course he can do it really fast, but I can't do it very fast or smoothly. And he said, now this is not rocket science, this is a very simple thing, but the thing is that you don't have the neurological pathways set up to do this already in motion. You can hop on one foot and you can skip and you can do jumping jacks. There's lots of other motor skills that you've learned over time, but this is new. And so in that very first phase of self-awareness, there is definitely an awkwardness because you're paying very close attention to something and you're recognizing that as you're paying attention, you can't move smoothly through it, and that's uncomfortable. And here's the thing, that awkwardness is the beginning of the gap. It is the beginning of the phase of awareness between stimulus and response. You probably could ask yourself, well, why would I want to go back on something I can do automatically and create a self-conscious gap in the beginning of it? To that I say, Catherine Middlebrooks of the yoga instruction that I was telling you about had a video on how to walk. And of course, as adults, we all know how to walk, but do we really know how to walk? Are we aware of the muscles that we use and whether those muscles are used properly when we're walking? And she was talking about the difference between the lean back and the step forward, and the lean forward and the push back. And these two different ways of walking work different muscles, and some lead to problems with your core and some do not. So going back to the basics and actually paying very close attention to a thing that you've already got on autopilot can be very useful because it gives you space. It gives you that gap between stimulus and response that allows you to think through, is this really what I want to do? Now, on something that's been working for you all this time, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I still think that there's a really good opportunity that you could have. You're like, I already have that down, I do it automatically, I don't need to go back and become more conscious of it as it's happening. But to that I say there's going to be an exception. There's going to be a moment where your autopilot isn't going to apply and isn't going to work. And if you have spent some time looking under the hood for that action, you've created the gap already, and it is so much easier to recognize and correct for the exception when that happens if you've already gone through and made that mental consciousness of the process. Basically, mind the gap. And when you mind the gap, you create a space where you're self-aware of your actions and you're self-aware of the situation, and you can change it when it's necessary. Sometimes that's better created before there's a problem than when you hit one. I'll talk to you next week.